Hello, welcome back to another weekly case update with the Liberty Justice Center. I'm Randon Steinhauser, and I'm joined this week again by LJC President Jacob Huebert. Hi, Jacob.
Hi.
Thanks for joining. So, this week, LJC has been very busy, and we just put out a release related to the situation happening in Loudoun County, Virginia. Now, for folks who've been following this case, there's always fallout and drama happening for some reason in Loudoun County, whether it relates to the curriculum, the conversations about what's happening in the classroom or not happening in the classroom. And in this case, there's been an overt effort to censor students' speech. And Liberty Justice Center just put out information about this over the last few weeks and called on the court to strike down this bias reporting system that is having students report or tattle, if you will, on other students because they don't like what they're saying. Jacob, give us the update on this. What is happening? How are these students' free speech rights being infringed? And what is LJC doing about it?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, the Loudoun County School District there in Northern Virginia enacted this bias reporting system where students were encouraged to report on each other using a form provided by the school for other students saying things that they consider inappropriate. And the things they can report on aren't just true instances of, say, harassment or intimidation. That students get in trouble just for expressing their thoughts on controversial issues, particularly those that are related in any way to race. And you might think, oh, well, students shouldn't be going around using racial slurs, but that's not what it's about. The school has given examples of what kinds of things could be reported, including, in their words, microaggressions. And that includes, according to them, things like saying, I believe in a colorblind society, or I don't think that white privilege exists. Now, people may have different nuanced thoughts on those questions, but of course, these are opinions that people have, and they're opinions that people should be able to express. I mean, the students have First Amendment rights at school, as long as they're not actually disrupting education through what they're saying. And of course, it's important for students to be able to exchange ideas with each other, with their teachers, because of course, ideally, dialogue is going to create understanding. But when you do what this school has done, and you've said, well, if you say the wrong thing and another student doesn't like it, they can report you, and then, who knows what consequences you might face for that. That shuts down dialogue, makes people afraid of each other, see each other as enemies, and increases division, decreases understanding. And that's just a really bad thing all around. And so our lawsuit is we've brought on behalf of parents and children in this school system who say, our speech has been chilled here. We don't feel free to speak our minds because we don't know what we're going to get reported for and what kind of trouble that's going to get us into. And we've asked the court to strike this down for violating students' First Amendment rights. Originally, the federal district court in this case dismissed our case and said, well, these students don't know they would get in trouble. They don't have standing to challenge this. But earlier this year, we won at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit said, no, these students have alleged that this is chilling their speech. They have alleged a valid First Amendment claim, and so the federal courts do have to hear it. And so that Court of Appeals sent that back to the federal trial court, and now we're in a position to ask the court to strike this thing down, and we're hopeful that we'll get a favorable decision finally ending this within the next few months.
So, based on where things are today, given this challenge and given the news around this, it's been in the media. Do you feel like this is actually happening right now, or have they sort of suppressed this censorship effort, given the fact that attention is being brought to it? And then my follow-up is, do we have any indication of what the punishment would be for some of these students? Have we seen a case where a student has been, reported to having bias and has to go through some like anti-bias training? Like, what is the process there if we know?
Well, so this is all still going on. They built not just this bias reporting system, but a big program centered around making race and racial issues, and in particular ideological perspective on race-related issues, a big thing in their school. It's not just the reporting. There's a lot more to it than that we don't have time to go into. But the whole scheme is still there. But after we won our appeal earlier this year, and right before we were going to ask the court to strike this thing down, the school said, oh, we haven't mentioned this before, but we're not using the form now. We're not giving students the form anymore. And so they argue, well, there's no case here. This case should just go away. You don't like the form, we're not putting out the form. But that's not nearly enough, because the whole scheme still exists. You can still report it. And the bias response system, it still exists. It's just about this form. And of course, the government shouldn't be able to make a case go away by just saying, oh yeah, we're not doing that right now, because of course then the case could go away and they could start doing it again. And there's every reason to think that these people would do this again, because they're really into this sort of critical race theory, social justice stuff, and making it a part of their school. And so it is. So despite what they argue, it is still going on. And the consequences for wrong speech aren't clear to students. This isn't all spelled out for them so that they can understand what process they would go through if they're investigated for their speech, what consequences they could face. And of course, that lack of detail, if anything, makes it worse, because students are intimidated by this and they don't know what kind of trouble they can get to. You know, if you're a high school student, you're worried about what's on your record. You're worried about what's going to affect your ability to get into a good college if you have some disciplinary thing on your record. And so it's just this rather vague, broad thing that's looming over students and intimidating them into not speaking their minds on important issues.
Absolutely. It feels very much like, even at the K-12 level that we're seeing here in Loudoun County, they're already intimidating students through the idea of, if you don't agree with the chosen narrative by one perspective or one ideological group, then you're not allowed to say anything or really even think anything, right, about the opposite of this. And so as a parent, I just want to say, you know, good for those students who did bring this to the attention of their parents and said something doesn't feel right here. Good for the parents who are standing up and say, you cannot censor my child's free speech rights. You cannot censor them, especially in something that's very ideologically bent as it relates to issues around race or gender or whatever it is that they're trying to police. But at the same time, I think it's really important for folks to know that Liberty Justice Center, this is just one of the examples where you're on the front lines defending students constitutional rights, and that these individuals in this school system, they also deserve to have their rights protected. We've seen the same thing as it relates to college students and free speech on campus. We had the Tizon case in Arizona, of course, we've talked about previously, where you have a college student who got arrested for handing out the Constitution. Are you seeing a trend? And I think I know the answer to this. Are you seeing a trend where, if you're looking at things from one perspective, whether it's, you know, more traditional American values or, you know, a limited role of government, or being open to having debate and critical thinking, that those things are under attack all across the board?
That's right. We see this in schools, K-12 schools, universities especially, have tried to police people's speech, have tried to favor some views over others, intimidate people into not expressing views that go against the views of the people who are running the university or certain groups of students. And this is disturbing. And that's why we're fighting back against this. I mean, education is supposed to be about an exchange of ideas. It's supposed to involve open communication, and to have that shut down and to have schools become something where you are just indoctrinated into one viewpoint and intimidated into not considering other ideas, at least not out loud, is really disturbing. And so that's why we are representing students and parents to challenge this. And as you say, it's so important that the parents and the students were willing to stand up here. At the Liberty Justice Center, our work depends on people who are willing to stand up for their rights. You know, a lot of people see things going on, they complain about it, they wish things were different. But to change things, we need people who are willing to put their names on a lawsuit and demand that the government respect their rights. And we make it as easy for people as we can by representing them for free to protect their rights in court. But the people in the first place who we represent need to have that courage. And so we're so grateful that these parents have that courage and that all our other clients have had that courage.
Absolutely. As we've mentioned in previous week's discussion, you can go to libertyjusticecenter.org. There's a contact form there. Again, as Jacob has said in the past, LJC does the heavy lifting. So if you feel like your rights have been violated, LJC does represent clients for free and will always stand up for constitutional rights, especially as it relates to your free speech, as we've been talking about in today's case. So thanks for joining, Jacob, and we'll be back next week with another case update.
Thank you.